Hi everyone. I recently went to Kubecon in Chicago and I had a great experience. I want to start by sharing that experience with you, how I got to go to Kubecon, and also a little bit of my takeaways. So I'm going to start by sharing my experience. And first off, when I walked in, I was absolutely amazed by how big everything was. I'd been to a few New Zealand conferences and they typically span 1 or 2 days. They might have 2 or 3 rooms and also maybe a couple of vendors, but this was next level. There were so many vendors, so many different presentations going on, and just generally there were so many people. The keynote was one of the first experiences that I had, and it was absolutely massive. You can see this is the room here, and if you think what you can see in front of me, there's then that again behind me. So absolutely massive stage with lots of projectors and lights, pumping music and a great atmosphere. Then you can go and check out the solution showcase between the presentations. So there's lots of different vendors there like Microsoft, Azure, AWS, Google Cloud. Basically, lots of different vendors that have solutions catered to solving all your different problems. And you can get more customized advice because you're talking to them about the problems you are actually facing. So it can be quite useful, and I actually found it almost more beneficial to talk to them in some cases than go to some of the presentations because I'm at an early stage in my modernization journey. So um, my understanding of the more detailed technical presentations was not quite there. But I found them still really good to get little snippets from, and I'm going to share some of those snippets with you guys later. So I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to go to KubeCon in Chicago through the Dan Kohn Scholarship. So that's a scholarship that is typically geared towards people from diverse backgrounds who wouldn't be able to get to this conference otherwise. Me as a woman in tech qualified for that. I think that you might also be able to get it if you're an open source software contributor. And I'm not too sure on the details of what qualifies you, but I think impact that you would have by attending is one of the criteria. It's worth checking out if you are interested in KubeCon and Cloud Native Con. And also just even subscribing to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation newsletters because they send out different webinars that you can attend. So even if you can't attend in person, you can get a lot of knowledge just by going to different webinars that are available. And I think they also offer virtual scholarships. So yeah, I was very lucky to be able to attend. I'm very thankful to anyone who supports the Dan Kohn Scholarship. So I talked a little bit about the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So I want to answer a little bit of what the Cloud Native Computing Foundation actually is. So they're basically an organization responsible for providing a vendor-neutral view of open source technology, and especially those enabling developers to leverage the full power of cloud computing. So one of the key ones that is well known in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation is Kubernetes. And you've also got like Argo and Containerd, which is like the Docker container runtime. So there's lots of cool software out there that you can use, and that's open source, and then there's supporting tooling around it. But the idea is to be vendor neutral so that you can leverage the full power of cloud computing. I found out about this cool program when I was in the conference, and it's called Zero to Merge, and it's a program that's geared towards learning how to start contributing to Cloud Native Computing Foundation projects. So that might be of interest to you if you haven't done any open source contributions and you're interested in building up your profile. And you can just join this course and learn a bit more about it. I think it's starting in spring next year. That's in like North American time zones. So maybe April. I don't know exactly the dates. But if you scan that QR code, there's a form that you can use to register, and you'll get updates when the course starts. So I also want to talk a little bit about Kubernetes because that's like the main focus of Kubecon. So I want to liken it to a soccer team. We've got the control plane node, which is basically responsible for organizing everything that's going on. And then we've got the worker nodes that are the players of the team. They are the ones that are doing the work and serving your application to people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each different part. We've got that control plane node. You would typically have more than one because you want high availability. If you didn't have more than one and the node went down for whatever reason, it could be like a server or something, so like a hardware failure or even a networking failure. Then if you only have one and it goes down, your whole system's down because everything sort of goes through there. You're not going to be able to manage your Kubernetes cluster. Then you've got your worker nodes. You're also going to have multiple of these. They're going to be responsible for running your different applications, which are going to be containerized. I'm actually going to do a presentation that goes into more detail on this soon, but I am not ready with that one yet, so you're going to just get this basic overview now. The worker nodes and the control plane nodes communicate via the API server, and we have different parts of the other different components, which are the scheduler, which is responsible for figuring out which worker node to schedule work onto. We've got the data store, which holds configuration value about the desired state, because Kubernetes is basically trying to get you into a desired state. It's managing your container orchestration to ensure that you are able to scale your application and manage like lots of different containers. It's typically quite common in like a microservices architecture because you're going to have to manage having lots of different containers for all your different microservices. So yeah, the data store stores that configuration, and if you get out of if the current state is not in sync with the desired state, then the control plane node will basically try to ensure that we're working towards the desired state so that we are able to handle the scale that we require. The controller manager is basically responsible for things like deployments and stuff like that. It manages the different controllers. And the cloud controller manager basically helps you connect to your cloud provider API. That one is only necessary if you're running Kubernetes in the cloud and not like on your own servers. It is quite complex to configure Kubernetes, I believe, so that is a reasonably common thing to do. So I'm going to dive a bit more into detail on the worker node. So with the worker node, we've got the kube proxy component, which is responsible for networking. It'll handle like IP stuff so that you can actually connect to your different worker nodes because you've got a few different servers running together, and you need it to sort of be seamless. You don't want the developer manually having to manage that. You've also got the kubelet, which talks to the API server basically and gets like new work. And inside the worker node, you have the container runtime instance that could be like container D or cryo. Those are different Cloud Native Computing Foundation container runtimes. And that basically runs the different pods. And the pod is basically the smallest schedulable unit of work, and it has the containers that make up your application. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my key takeaways outside of what is Kubernetes. And one of them was that you can have test containers. So you can containerize databases so you can test data access, and you know your database will always start in a known state. It seemed like it'd be really useful, and I know someone who has used that functionality before, and it simplified their process of setting up their tests. They didn't need to mock lots of data, they were actually able to connect to a seemingly real database, even though it was just, well, it was in a container. So it is technically a real database. It's just not one that's persisted anywhere. Another one I found interesting was the concept that came through quite a lot was build to abstractions. So you're mitigating vendor lock-in by using standardized interfaces and abstraction layers to enhance portability and flexibility. And you can do this by adhering to industry standards. So one of the things that I heard about at Kubecon was open feature, I believe, and that's basically a standard for feature toggles, so that, or feature flags, that basically means you can call an interface or an abstraction and it'll use like an underlying provider that you can then switch out the provider and change your feature flag provider without impacting your application code as much. You might need to change some configuration and stuff like that, but it's very minimal changes compared to changing everywhere where you're checking if a feature flag is a particular value. So I thought that was quite interesting and useful. Another thing I learnt about was preview environments, which is basically gives you the ability to shift left feedback. So a preview environment allows you to spin up a environment for feedback on a feature early in the process. So when a pull request is created, it will give you a URL maybe for the product manager or someone like that to go have a look and see the feature. They can provide feedback on the feature at the same time you're getting code review feedback, so you can get earlier involvement of non-technical stakeholders. And so you get more feedback on the impact of the change to customers, which is going to lead to better product outcomes. So I thought that was quite a useful thought, and that is something that's becoming more prominent in the industry. Another thing that I thought was quite cool, but I didn't actually delve deep into, is CI and code. So there's a cool tool called Dagger, and it allows you to test CI code locally and in languages such as Go or Python instead of YAML. So instead of having to wait for your pipelines to run, which I think we've all experienced, and then they fail and you have to rerun again, make a small change, rerun again, you can do it locally, see what's having issues, and then you can push your changes. No one needs to know how many iterations it took you to get it right, because it's all just done locally. And yeah, it speeds up that feedback experience once again and makes for a better dev experience for developers. Another thing I felt like was quite a recurring theme was basically observability is everything. Users expect to be able to use a product at any time of the day without outages, which means we need to be able to respond quickly to any outages, and that means we need the best observability tooling, logging, and traceability throughout our whole system to help us find what the problem is, isolate it, and fix it. I thought one interesting thought that someone mentioned was it's not just about alerting, like an alert without context is not going to give you enough. Because say I told my 4-year-old that the rubbish bin was full, he would be like, oh yeah, the rubbish bin is full. But he wouldn't take the rubbish bin out, or he wouldn't do anything with the rubbish bin. But if I gave him the context, like, hey, the rubbish bin is full, I think you need to take this out. Like, this is the context, this is what I think is wrong, this is what needs to be done, then he's going to understand that and be able to action that. And I think the same is true with developers, and that was an interesting point a salesperson made at the conference, and it stuck with me quite a bit. So that was quite an interesting thought. So I hope you've enjoyed this very rapid fire talk about Kubecon, and I hope you're inspired to start contributing to open source. I really enjoyed my time there. And if you're interested more in Kubernetes, the Kubernetes book by Nigel Poulton is quite a good one. I'll link it in the description. It's what I used to get the basic understanding of Kubernetes, and I was lucky to get a signed copy at KubeCon.